Welcome to the Vegas Offshore Wise Guy Show. I'm Joe Duffy of OffshoreInsiders.com, and along with Troy West of TroyWins.com, we're going to preview the NFC conference. Of course, we've already given you the AFC, and we plan on doing various and sundry previews throughout this summer on Sportsbook Review. And make sure you do subscribe to Sportsbook Review's YouTube page. I know they gave some tremendous previews of the World Cup. You got baseball all year long, some of the other international sports. Sportsbook Review covers it all, so make sure you definitely like the YouTube page, subscribe, never ever miss a video, and they just keep adding more and more great programming, including a lot of stuff on YouTube Live. Well, Troy, we did a great job, I think, and some of the comments said as well on our AFC preview. Now let's preview the NFC. Not shockingly, the defending Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles are the favorite at plus 420. Still not 100% certain. It does look like Carson Wentz will probably be the starting quarterback on opening day as he's recovering from his injury. The scary thing is, on paper, the proverbial on paper, Philadelphia could be even better than they were last year. They're even getting Jason Peters back. Of course, you never know about the health, but they did have their share of injuries on the offensive line. Of course, with their starting quarterback, but it turns out they had the best backup quarterback in the NFL, and they've added some talent on the defensive side of the ball. So how can you argue with Philadelphia being the favorites to return to the Super Bowl?
Well, Joe, I obviously come up with a lot of my own information, but a guy that I respect a lot through NBC, a guy named Mike Florio, who covers the NFL exclusively. And, this Philadelphia team, if you look at last year, I don't want to call it lucky, but they had a lot of things go their way to get themselves into the Super Bowl. A play here, a play there, a penalty here, a penalty there. It really kind of got them into the Super Bowl. And I don't want to take anything away from Philadelphia. Roster-wise, they are outstanding, but it is so hard to repeat in this league. I mean, other than New England here the last few years, we have not seen it. And even in the NFC East alone, Joe, we haven't had a team win the division 2 years in a row in quite some time. So it's really hard to repeat in this league. The NFC East, I think, is going to be a really good division this year. I think the Cowboys are going to be good. The Giants are going to be improved, and the Redskins are competitive. So I'm not taking anything away from Philadelphia. The roster's definitely there. Doug Peterson did lose his offensive coordinator. Can he make proper adjustments there? He lost a couple of other big coordinators that were, a huge impact to Philadelphia. So plus 420, decent value, but I'm not so sure this team's going to repeat. They're definitely not my favorite team in the NFC right now.
Mike Florio is definitely a very knowledgeable guy, and, of course, made a fortune, was bought out by NBC, and he was probably one of the very earlier people who, was successful on the Internet without a lot of money behind him. Of course, he is a lawyer, so he did have some money behind him. Then he was eventually bought out by NBC in his Pro Football Talk, thanks to a good friend of mine, Steve Preston, who does sends me some of his advice. He's the one who first told me about Pro Football Talk before it was that well known. Mike's a very knowledgeable guy. I agree, but the truth is, you don't win the Super Bowl without sneaking out a close game here and there. Yeah, they do face the burden of high expectations, and for a defending Super Bowl champion, a little bit more than 4-1, it's not like they're the prohibitive favorites by any stretch of the imagination. One of the reasons I think Philadelphia's been successful, they don't really depend on just one or two receivers. They spread the ball out. Zach Ertz, one of the best tight ends, and Nelson Aguilar certainly leads a pretty deep group of options. They did add some to defense. Haloti Ngata and Michael Bennett were both added on the defensive side of the ball. So they're probably a little bit stronger, but you are right. To win the Super Bowl, sometimes you got to be lucky to be good and good to be lucky. Even in the New England Patriots, in all their Super Bowls, the only time that it was not all that close, and the only time it couldn't have gone either way, I think they've been in the 8 Super Bowls, and 7 of them literally could have gone either way. The only exception was the first time they played Philadelphia in the Super Bowl. But, yeah, it is true what you and Mike Florio said. Still, you do have to have, a little bit of luck. They've added Mike Wallace as an additional weapon. So, like I said, deep group of receivers. Even if Nick Foles winds up having to start the first 3 or 4 games, he's more than competent. I disagree with Chris Carter. I think Nick Foles proved that he is definitely a legitimate starting quarterback in the league. The key is really who's going to be their quarterback for their final 12 games and into the playoffs. And hopefully for Philadelphia, they can have their franchise quarterback stay healthy. Carson Wentz certainly showed that he's for real. But again, like we talked about with a couple quarterbacks in the AFC, and we'll even talk about, I think, with some more quarterbacks here. Still a young guy coming off of a pretty critical injury, and when defenses still have a chance to break down his game a little bit more, Carson Wentz, I don't know. I don't think that Carson is necessarily clearly and unequivocally guaranteed to be a top 5 quarterback this year. He certainly is a top 5 quarterback entering this year, but still coming off a key injury, and as a guy who doesn't have the track record of a Ben Roethlisberger and a Tom Brady and some other quarterbacks, still has a little bit to prove. But on paper, they are a slightly better team. But you are right; they did have some luck going their way. Next, the Minnesota Vikings. I think one of the most intriguing teams in the NFL. Did they really improve at the quarterback position? I've never been a huge Kirk Cousins fan. Case Keenum, talk about the poster child for no respect. He clearly, and I think that too often when we evaluate quarterbacks, we love these gunslinger guys. Brett Favre, I do think, is one of the all-time greats. One of the reasons I wouldn't put him in the top 10 is because I think he didn't think turnovers were all that detrimental as kind of the cost of doing business, where Case Keenum did not turn the ball over last year and was a playmaker. Is Kirk Cousins going to be the favorite there? Plus 585. Of course, the odds vary. Make sure you check SBR odds and all the approved sportsbook at Sportsbook Review. But plus 585 are the odds for Minnesota. Are they the second best team in the NFC, Troy West?
Yeah, I actually think this is a really, really good Minnesota football team. This is a team that did it without their running back last year, Dalvin Cook, which, we'll see what he comes back and does. Kind of lost his rookie season last year, but prior to that injury looked outstanding. Will he provide a huge spark to that offense? Kirk Cousins, I think he's more capable of doing more things than Case Keenum was, but Case Keenum, like you talked about, very intelligent quarterback, didn't turn the ball over a lot, found guys when he needed to. Kirk Cousins, like you said, he could progress this team to being the best team in the NFC, or he could be his own worst enemy, a guy that turns the ball over a lot. We know they've got an outstanding defense. They're outstanding at home. I think it's a really good Minnesota football team, and if Kirk Cousins can click with that offense, he's got guys to throw to. He's got Adam Thielen. He's got Kyle Rudolph. If Treadwell can step up, he's got Stephon Diggs. This is a good wide receiving core, a lot of weapons. It's a really good Minnesota football team at plus 580. I actually think they've got one of the better odds in the NFC because I think they're a true contender, and I would not be shocked to see them playing on Super Bowl Sunday.
I do think when you compare Keenum to Cousins, Cousins is a perfect example of a guy with a higher ceiling, but also a lower floor. I do think with Keenum, he's going to be a very good quarterback, and he's probably not going to make the mistake. So Kirk Cousins, will he, and especially now where he really has those high expectations, I think he's on right outside the cusp of the bubble of being one of my, as I like to say, predictably unpredictable quarterbacks. But still, I think I'm going to go against Kirk Cousins if he's a really big favorite. Now, of course, there are a lot of other factors that go into it, but I should say a little bit more of a lean that way. Here's something that's very key for Minnesota. When I really like to look at futures, I was playing millions of times where I don't really like to make the futures bets, but I look at their schedule. I think the first 5 weeks they face Garoppolo, Rodgers, Goff, and Wentz, assuming, Wentz is coming 100% back from his injury. They were the number 1 rated defense based on both some of the traditional statistics and the advanced analytics statistics last year. So I think if anything, they might be a little bit of an over team early on in the season, but then they will become an under team because I think their statistics might be artificially a little bit high after those first 5 weeks, especially their pass defense is going to be tested big time. So I think maybe an under team at first, and then starting with week 6, they could be a little bit of an over team. You're 100% correct. If Dalvin Cook does come back healthy, he is a clear playmaker, really helped them a lot, started to really evolve in their screen game. We know Latavius Murray, one heck of a backup 1-2 punch. You mentioned Thielen, who just the perfect type of wide receiver, like the kind of wide receiver you want when you draft in the lower rounds. He just kept getting better and better each and every year. 12, 69, then 91 receptions in his career so far. Can he continue to progress? I don't know about that, but can he match it? Well, it looks like because he's gotten better every year, you would hope so. Laquan Treadwell, he's been a disappointment so far, but could this be his breakout year? If so, most definitely Minnesota could be the favorite to win it all, and they added Sheldon Richardson to one of the best defensive lines in football. So, again, in my humble opinion, it pretty much always comes down to the quarterback, how good the Minnesota quarterback situation, how good Kirk Cousins is. Was he the biggest off-season signing? If so, they are I would actually put them ahead of Philadelphia if Kirk Cousins tends to be a good signing. Well, the most improved team in the NFL last year was the LA Rams. They are plus 600. We know that the perfect marriage, McVay and Goff, that, Goff went from a guy Jared Goff, I don't know if you can necessarily accuse a guy of being a bust in his rookie year, but showed, didn't really seem to justify being the number one pick in the draft. Then all of a sudden, again, I said the same thing about Thielen, back in the old days before you would have all these rookie starting quarterbacks, maybe when a guy would start in his second or third year, whatever, you would expect him to make some mistakes and then improve. And that's kind of what Jared did do with the Rams. But is he truly one of the elite quarterbacks? The LA Rams are plus 600, Troy West.
Yeah, boy, you talk about a team with a lot of variables this year. Holy mackerel. I mean, you add Ndamukong Suh, you add Marcus Peters, you add Akeem Talib. I mean, you're adding essentially three guys that with their former teams were cancers. So you have three cancers to a team that really had a lot of good team chemistry, I thought, last year. So, I think these are good moves, but boy, they are scary moves. I mean, you look at historic moves like these, when you add that many egotistical guys to one team, it's never a recipe for winning. It's typically a recipe for disaster. With that said, boy, Sean McVay's got his work cut out for him because he's going to have to get these guys playing as one unit or it's just not going to happen. Like you said, Jared Goff, they look like they're going to be good again on offense again this year. They did lose Sammy Watkins, but you know what? Guys stepped up. Cooper Kupp stepped up last year. He's still got weapons. Obviously, he's got his running back as well. This is a good Ram team. I do think they're the favorite in the West. The Seahawks, to me, take a big step back. The 49ers, to me, yes, they got Garoppolo. I'll probably talk about them later, but I don't think they're as good as the Rams, and the Arizona Cardinals got a lot of question marks. So I think the Rams are almost a lock to get into the playoffs, but to get to the Super Bowl, they have to have a lot of things go right. And that defense, which on paper looks as scary as a defense as I've seen in a really long time, but can they coexist? The minute they start losing or things go wrong, that entire locker room could blow up in a hurry. So a lot of question marks for the Rams, but as far as roster goes, it's one of the most, if not the most talented roster in the NFC.
They also, in addition to the additions on defense, Brandon Cooks, 23rd pick in the draft, very speedy wide receiver. And yeah, it's true with Todd Gurley, not only one of the better all-around running backs in the NFC, but especially when you might be worried about a young quarterback's confidence, because 2 years ago, as we said, he was lacked confidence, and last year all of a sudden he put it together. But maybe if his confidence is hurting, he's got that safety valve. Gurley is one of the best receivers coming out of the backfield, so can get Goff's confidence up by completing those short passes. But McVay, I want to see him do it again. It happens in every single sport. A coach will have one good year, and especially when he takes over a team that underachieved, they want to make him a genius. Now there's a little bit more scouting on McVay's tendencies and whatnot, and he does come in. I use this term a lot, but the burden of high expectations, which last year they were able to sneak up on teams, are certainly not going to do that this year. But clearly, one of the big stories to watch would be the Rams. As you said, they made some risky changes that have a possible high return. And as I said, is Jared Goff truly among the top quarterbacks in the NFL, or will he take a step back? Green Bay Packers at plus 635. Well, you talk about a guy who's more than proven at quarterback. Aaron Rodgers is that. He is coming back from a shoulder injury, but the last time he did that, a broken collarbone, but the last time he did that, he won the MVP. So, yeah, I'm pretty confident. Yeah, Aaron isn't getting any younger, as the saying goes, but he's still among the best quarterbacks in the NFL. He plays with heart. I think that at plus 635, the Packers are pretty darn good. Yeah, they don't have a ton of depth on the defensive side of the ball, but I think it really comes down to the two Aarons. Last year they drafted Aaron Jones, who got off to a great start at running back. looked like he was going to be one of the top rookies in the NFL. Then he wound up getting hurt, but he put up tremendous numbers. They're talking about a running back by committee, but I think it's Jones' job to win. There are still some questions as far as depth on the defensive side of the ball, but as somebody who loves looking at skill position players and quarterbacks first and foremost, Green Bay's pretty tempting at plus 635.
Yeah, I think, Joe, like you said right away, they're handicapped on their defense. They do have a pretty darn good defensive line. Linebacker, they're getting older, and that secondary is young, but they really, they went out and drafted Kevin King, and last year just didn't do much as a rookie. Their secondary's got some holes. Offensively, Aaron Rodgers, he loses, his favorite weapon. He loses Jordy Nelson. A lot of people say, well, that's not much of a loss, but let's be honest, Aaron Rodgers and Jordy Nelson had that chemistry. He adds Jimmy Graham, which I think Jimmy Graham's going to be a great addition to this team, but, and he's still got Devontae Adams and Randall Cobb. He's got his core guys, but I think Jordy Nelson, losing him, that's going to hurt that offense a little bit. The running back position, like you said, huge question mark. If Jones doesn't come back healthy, Ty Montgomery is average at best. Offensive line's good, but it's not great. But I think that defense, that secondary for Green Bay is really going to hinder them late in the season. So for me, it's a pass to get them to the Super Bowl. Another, Aaron Rodgers exit early, and I think we'll probably be talking about Mike McCarthy back on the hot seat once again once we get later into the season, because I don't think this team's good enough to win the Super Bowl. Aaron Rodgers, to me, arguably the best quarterback in the NFL, but I don't think he's got enough defense. And even offensively, like I said, you lose a guy like Jordy Nelson, who was a guy that he really counted on throughout the course of the year. I think losing him is a bigger loss than people are giving credit for.
Yeah, Devontae Adams definitely established himself as the new number one guy last year. And I know, we in the media and football fans, we tend to stereotype guys who look like Jordy Nelson as more possession type guys. But the truth is, he was a pretty good big play guy. So there is no question that is a big weapon that they will miss. And yeah, as much as I love Rodgers, I will admit he doesn't have a ton of weapons unless Aaron Jones does evolve. They got Williams and Montgomery in that backfield as well. So their running game should be fine and potentially very good. Like I said, it just really comes down to the two Aarons. But when you look at the injury reports, if Green Bay starts getting injuries on the defensive side of the ball, it's going to be even more key for them than most teams because, like we said, they've got some depth. So some depth issues, I should say. So the injury report's always important, but I think even more important for Green Bay on the defensive side of the ball. And that, the Packers are one of those teams where a small injury could actually be a big injury because, when you look at injury reports in every single sport, I think it's not only about who they're losing, and of course you got to pay attention to when key guys come back, but how much of a drop-off there is. And with the Packers on the defensive side of the ball, there could be a big drop-off. New Orleans Saints, we knew they always had an explosive offense. They even have a more balanced offense, and they got better on defense last year. They had an outstanding draft class, probably. They had the best group of rookies last year who contributed big time, certainly among the best. At plus 850, they've got to be pretty tempting. And like I said, in the previous years when they had no defense, a big part of the reason was because they didn't have a balanced offense. Last year, they turned out they had one of the best 1-2 running back punches in the NFL. So they were more balanced. Their defense was off the field a lot more. But Troy West, is the Saints defense, the drastically improved Saints defense for real?
Last year, let's be honest, this team was a fluky play away from getting past Minnesota and moving on to the Philadelphia Eagles. It could have been a whole different outcome to the season last year had they pulled that game off. So, will they have a hangover going into this year, or will it be a chip on their shoulder? Drew Brees, another year older, but he doesn't seem to be regressing at all. Offensively, they've got the weapons, they've got the run game. And as you talked about, that defense was very, very young last year, and they looked outstanding. You got to think that they're only going to improve. So at those odds, I think the Saints, I think when you literally look at the entire scope of the NFC, I think it's a wide open conference. I really do. I think the NFC conference, there's about 10 teams to me that are all very equal to win the Super Bowl, and the Saints are in that mix. So at those kind of odds, I think they've got as good a chance as anybody. Sean Payton, another year under his belt, he really seemed to kind of revive that team and also revive his career. He was on the hot seat there for a while. Finally got that defense clicking. Offensively, they're good. And like I said, they've kind of got that chip on their shoulder for what happened last year. So as long as they don't have a hangover and they're not down in the dumps from what happened, I think this team's got as good a shot as anybody. They're in a division with a Tampa Bay team that looks like they're not going anywhere. We know Jameis Winston's out for the first few games of the year. That division, I think, is one of the weaker divisions in the NFC. So I like the Saints quite a bit here.
Yeah, that would be an understatement. A fluky play indeed. One of the great plays of all time. As you can see with my gray beard, I've been watching sports for a long time. And when it comes to, how important it was at the end of the game, definitely up there with, the lateral and the Bills a couple years ago and all that. But yeah, a crazy play indeed. But, it gets back to what I've said. In the playoffs, you're going to have a little bit of luck. So, we're getting back to what we were talking about for the Philadelphia Eagles. Just about any team that advances winds up getting a little bit of luck. But, look, as I said, I like skill position players. We know that Drew Brees is an all-time great, but with, Ingram really establishing himself and maybe the fact that Ingram could be, half of a great 1-2 punch with Kamara. He's a better running back. So I do think the fact that New Orleans is so much more balanced on offense, if they can continue to have that great running game that's going to make their defense better. Obviously, Marshawn Lattimore was the defensive rookie of the year, a true shutdown corner. So they did make improvements on defense and then improvements on the balance of their offense that really helped out their defense. We'll talk about, fluky plays. No team has been a bigger victim of flukier stuff the last 2 years in the playoffs than the Atlanta Falcons. They were just a trip, literally a trip away from going further. And then, of course, we know that they are the only team in the history of the Super Bowl to lose a game in overtime. The Falcons at plus 1025 seem a little bit undervalued, especially because they've been on the wrong side of some heartbreaking losses the last 2 years. And it's still pretty similar as far as the nucleus and the talent to that team that did go to overtime of the Super Bowl 2 years ago. The key, though, Julio Jones, one of the best receivers in the NFL, but didn't really play like it last year. He dropped a lot of passes. He did sign a big contract. No, he still wants the big contract. So they will eventually sign him. I don't think that's going to be an issue. But the big question is he still one of the elite receivers in the NFL? Yeah, the defense, look, they did that experiment last year with Vic Beasley, and now he's going to stay at the defensive end position. I think, normally I say it comes down to the quarterback. In this case, I think the key is Julio Jones still one of the top receivers in the game? But how do you like the Falcons at plus 1025, Troy?
Yeah, you kind of stole my thunder there, Joe. I think, Julio Jones really is the X factor here. And I think right now with him asking for this contract, there's a lot of dysfunctionality going on in that locker room. Matt Ryan, he's been questioned year after year after year. Can he get it done? And boy, he just has not got it done. And last year, again, in the playoffs against the Philadelphia Eagles, they really had that football game, but they could not put up the points to get it done. This is a really talented team. They're good at the running back position. I think Matt Ryan's a good quarterback. He's got his weapons at wide receiver, even without Julio Jones. Defensively, they're pretty well balanced. They've got Trufant that kind of covers up that back end. They got Beasley, who's one of the best defensive ends in the game. There's so much talent on this team. Dan Quinn's an outstanding coach. Steve Sarkisian will be in his second year as the offensive coordinator, and that offense started to elevate a little bit towards the end of the year. But, Julio Jones, like you said, he kind of seems like he's checked out. This is a guy that, like you said, was one of the best, if not the best wide receiver in the game, and, kind of really struggled down the stretch to last year. Doesn't seem motivated coming into this year. And I think when you get a team that, lost in the Super Bowl the way that they did, then the last year they kind of had the hangover. Now this year they're older. And I just think the chip is gone at this point. The motivation's gone. They still got players, and they're going to want their ring, but there's not a lot of buzz going around Atlanta. At 1025, I could see them obviously getting into the playoffs and possibly making noise, but they wouldn't be my first bet. I just think this team's kind of lost its chip and lost its edge.
And I talked about the Saints having a great 1-2 punch at running back. Obviously, the Falcons certainly have that as well with Freeman and Coleman. As far as Matt Ryan, that is one of the great debates, whether or not he's one of the elite quarterbacks. I said he's got to show me 2 years ago, but look, he took the team to the Super Bowl. They were up 28-7. There was some questionable play calling, to say the least, by Kyle Shanahan that really cost them that game. And even last year, that play at the end of the game where Jones winds up just falling into the end zone. A lot of people were questioning the play calling. Of course, everyone's going to question the play calling when it doesn't work. So Matt Ryan's probably, a rich man's Tony Romo. You talk about somebody being a poor man's whatever. I would say he's a rich man's Tony Romo, where Tony Romo, I think, is in his career had a couple bad breaks and probably should have won a few more playoff games. And we know about the catch rule that would have been a catch. And then, of course, against Seattle, where he fumbled the snap on a kick on the extra point and whatnot. But yeah, Matt Ryan, I think, is one of these guys who's been on the wrong side of some plays that could have gone either way, and some play calling that really wasn't his fault in the Super Bowl. I do think the Falcons have shown, well, Matt Ryan has shown that the Falcons do have the quarterback that's good enough to win the Super Bowl. And I do think their defense, I said, should be better with their best player, Beasley. They're not going to try to make him a hybrid. At 10-1, I find them, pretty tempting. Well, Troy, you mentioned we're going to talk a little bit more about Jimmy Garoppolo in this, and now we will. The San Francisco 49ers plus 1,200. I say it time and time again, it's amazing how you can go from a great coach to a bad coach or vice versa, depending on the quality of your quarterback. If Jimmy is clearly the answer at quarterback, then all of a sudden Kyle Shanahan, boy, he's set. He's got one of the great jobs in the NFL for many, many years to come. At plus 12-1, he's getting Pierre Garçon back. To me, Troy, and I doubt if you'll disagree, but we'll see. Maybe the single biggest is he for real question as far as potential Super Bowl contenders is the quarterback situation with Jimmy Garoppolo in San Fran. So I will ask you, Troy West of TroyWins.com, does San Francisco have one of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL?
Boy, I hate to say we haven't seen a big enough sample size, but I truly think we haven't seen a big enough sample size. I think this team's still a ways away. They go out and they add Richard Sherman to that defense. It'll be interesting to see at what caliber he's going to play coming off that Achilles tear. Jimmy Garoppolo, we obviously know what he did down the stretch and how he won football games. And, they beat a good Jacksonville Jaguar team. They put up a lot of points on that Jacksonville defense, and that was a true test for him. But I really want to see him play a 16-game season. And I think the San Francisco team, they're well coached. I think they're well managed up at the general manager level with Lynch. But this team, to me, does not have enough firepower offensively. Yes, he's got Pierre Garçon, but I still put him in the middle tier. I don't think he's a true number one wide receiver. Carlos Hyde, if he's your running back coming in, this guy's been in and out of injuries throughout his whole career. Hasn't really, solidified himself as an elite back. Offensive line's good. They addressed it in the draft, but I still think it has some holes. But defensively, I think they've got a lot of holes. There really isn't, other than, Richard Sherman, which God knows what you're going to get from that guy. If anything, he could hurt the locker room. This has been a guy that was with the Seattle Seahawks that, they weren't too intrigued by bringing Richard Sherman back. They were able to cut their losses and move on from him. So you add him to a San Francisco locker room, not necessarily an upgrade by any means. So I think the San Francisco 49ers are a big, big question mark. I don't think they're ready to win the NFC by any stretch of the imagination. So for me, let's watch Garoppolo before I can even call him elite. We got to see him for 16 games this year and see what he can do.
Well, here's one case where Troy and I were finally going to have a little bit of a disagreement here. I think Richard Sherman was a great addition. I think it's more of a situational type thing. San Fran's got a bunch of young guys in the secondary. And Sherman, he's a cerebral guy. Look, I understand how people could not like him because of some of the stuff where he's run his mouth. But the truth is, he's a very intelligent guy. Yeah, on a team of veterans where they had won the Super Bowl a couple years. And he's playing with some other playmakers in the secondary. I know they've lost some other guys from their Super Bowl team that you can see where maybe he'd wear out his welcome in the locker room there. But I think he's going to be very much welcome in this young Washington locker room where they look up to somebody who's going to be going to the Hall of Fame for sure. And, in the case of the 49ers, remember Goodwin really established himself as a top receiver last year, started clicking when Garoppolo took over. We know about that heartbreaking thing with his child, but he still went out and courageously had that great effort where I think he certainly won plenty of respect from his teammates. But there's a reason that they're 12-1. Could the San Francisco 49ers go to the Super Bowl at 12-1? Absolutely. But I do agree with Troy. They still got some question marks indeed. Well, we might disagree again, Troy. I heard you say at the top of this report you think Dallas is going to be contender. I think if there's a team that's on their way down, it's the Dallas Cowboys at 14-1. Des Bryant, he's going, much like we said about Julio Jones. Look, Des Bryant was certainly starting to regress, so whether or not he's one of the elite wide receivers anymore, that remains to be seen. But they lost Jason Witten, one of the great tight ends of all time. And I know they made some acquisitions, but this is still a team that lost a lot of talent off of the offensive side of the ball. But conversely, they could definitely be better, at least talent-wise, on defense. But you hinted at the top of this broadcast that you might like the Dallas Cowboys at 14-1 a little bit more than I do.
Yeah, absolutely. You can call me biased, but I'm also educated. And, I think this team, I think Dak Prescott is the guy for this offense. I really do. He struggled last year, but I think he struggled because they didn't have the run game that they had when Dak Prescott was a rookie. You bring back Ezekiel Elliott, and let's be honest, Ezekiel Elliott's rookie year, that was no fluke. And this is a guy coming back with a huge, huge chip on his shoulder. He's still running behind the best offensive line in football. Tyron Smith got a little bit banged up last year. He'll be back. It sounds like he's very healthy right now. They had Connor Williams in the draft. That's going to boost up that offensive line. We know Zach Martin just got his big deal. Travis Frederick's back. Le'Veon Collins is back. Wide receiver position, obviously a weakness, but they added a lot of guys. You added Allen Hurns. If he can come back and get back to that 1,000-yard season that he just had a couple of years ago. They added a couple of other guys, Deontay Thompson, who I think's got a lot of potential, just wasn't in the right passing game in Buffalo. Cole Beasley's back. Tight end, obviously a weakness, but guys can step up in that position. And then defensively, this is a team that really improved last year defensively. DeMarcus Lawrence making a case to be one of the better defensive ends in all of football. You get Taco Charlton under another year under his belt. David Irving will be back. And then Jalen Smith, he's coming back after his first full season. Him and Sean Lee, if he can stay healthy at linebacker. They draft Vanderbilt in the first round out of Boise State. Could be a really nasty linebacker core. Secondary's got some holes, but you add to me one of the best defensive secondary coaches in all of football, Chris Richard. It's amazing what can happen when you add a coach like him. What he did with the Legion of Boom for those years really kind of pays to show what he's capable of doing. If he can elevate this defense to the next level, I think the Dallas Cowboys, this is a team that's just 2 years removed from being 13-3, winning the NFC East, and ultimately losing to the Packers. But this is a good football team. They've made some good moves. I think if things go right and that offensive line stays healthy and Elliott stays healthy, this could be a really good football team.
Sean Lee, yeah, if he stays healthy, that's kind of like every single year you can say, when you give a national championship preview, you can say Alabama's the favorites. When you do the AFC preview, you can say the Patriots are the favorites. And when you talk about the Dallas Cowboys defense, you can say if Sean Lee can stay healthy, that's for sure. That's definitely been an issue, but there's no question that he can be one of the top players on the defensive side of the ball, most valuable players in the NFL. I do think that the Cowboys will probably start out as a little bit of an under team because, remember what I say, it's more about, when you're talking about handicapping totals, it's a lot more about pace and play calling than it is about offensive and defensive competence. So if Ezekiel Elliott has his head on straight, they're going to be a lot more run-oriented because of the losses that we talked about, and Dak Prescott's got that ability to keep plays alive with his legs. So I think they could sneak under the radar maybe as an under team because they did add some guys on defense, and they're a classic example of a team that took a step back or two on offense, but probably could be better on defense, and even with the return, they hope, of Ezekiel Elliott for all 16 games, they're going to be more of a ball control team. So I look for them to maybe the first couple weeks of the season to be an under team. The Carolina Panthers at plus 1450. Again, gets back to the old quarterback, Cam Newton. I call it the jinx of the press conference ever since that Super Bowl press conference where he was coming off of the MVP season. Played well in the playoffs to get there. Didn't play so well in the Super Bowl. But he has regressed since, even adding the big weapon in Christian McCaffrey didn't really seem to help him that much. I know he's got Norv Turner as his new offensive coordinator. We know that Troy Aikman thinks that Turner is the bee's knees and the cat's meow. They did add, though, some more weapons for Cam Newton on the offensive side of the ball. And another one of those things that, we talk about certain guys have make or break years. Jay Cutler had about 5 or 6 straight make or break years, and Matt Stafford seems to be having an annual make or break year. Maybe this is the first of 3 or 4 make or break years for Cam Newton. Can Cam Newton get Carolina back to the promised land, Troy West?
I don't think he can get him back to the promised land. I do think this is a really good football team that's got some weapons. Christian McCaffrey looked outstanding last year in his rookie year. He's only going to be better this year. But the wide receiver core is very, very weak in Carolina. Greg Olsen, if he comes back and healthy, he's aging. But, last year was in and out of the lineup all year. He's one of Cam Newton's favorite targets. I just don't think, defensively, Thomas Davis is going to be out at the start of the year. Luke Kuechly comes back. But, he's another guy that has had concussion problems, has been in and out of the lineup. The secondary's weak. I just don't think Carolina's got enough to get to the Super Bowl. Cam Newton, I don't want to take anything away from him. I think this year, more than ever, he just doesn't have the supporting cast. So even if he has a great year, I don't think it's going to be good enough to get back to the Super Bowl. Carolina just does not have the weapons that they used to. I just think they're going to be an 8-8 team, maybe 9-7, could sneak into the playoffs, but I don't see them going anywhere past the first round.
Well, DJ Moore and Torrey Smith are 2 guys that they did add in the off-season through the draft and through free agency. So maybe he will have some weapons. Carolina is, though, one of these teams that I love these athletic quarterbacks, but you know what I think about the athletic quarterbacks? We talked about it, I think, with Marcus Mariota on the AFC preview, that with a guy like a Cam Newton, I think you kind of got to put a little bit of reins on him during the regular season, pace yourself as far as him taking the physical beating. But once you go into the playoffs, you tell him, Cam, do whatever it takes. Use those legs. So I think Carolina is a team that could be more dangerous in the postseason than they are in the regular season. Of course, not like they're 100% guaranteed to make the postseason. As I recall, what it went down to the wire last year with several teams, including Carolina, as far as whether or not they'd make the playoffs. So you got to get in the playoffs, but I do think that Carolina could be even more dangerous and pull off an upset too. But like you said, Luke Kuechly is a question mark on the defensive side of the ball, Olsen on the offensive side of the ball. But they might be players that might have to pace themselves a little bit or their coaches would pace them as far as the number of plays they're going to play in. Then they play a lot more in the playoffs. So the Panthers do think will be more dangerous in the playoffs than the regular season. Another team that's plus 1450, the Detroit Lions. Anybody who's a client of mine at offshoreinsiders.com or who watches the videos here know that I'm not a big fan of Matt Stafford. Still, Matt Patricia, I guess the big rock star signing as far as coaches in the offseason. Can he be, a star head coach? Of course, we know all that he did in New England, and he was considered, one of the great minds. What is he? He's like a physicist or something like that. So we know that he is a brilliant mind, but he's got a quarterback who, in my opinion, is a coach killer. Conversely, they did tighten up their running back position. They're going to run the ball more, which means they're going to depend less on Matt Stafford. I think that's a good thing. Between Patricia with being, an alleged defensive guru, and the fact that he knows the key to a good defense is having an offense that keeps him off of the field. Look for Detroit to maybe be an under team early on in the year. And, Troy, like I said, I'm not a big Matt Stafford guy. He is capable. Talk about a guy with a big upside, but such a low floor, high ceiling, low floor. That's Matt Stafford. I don't know. Do I have a big Matt Stafford anti-bias, or do I say, I'm sorry, a team quarterback by Matt Stafford's not going to go to the Super Bowl, much less win it?
Absolutely. The guy hasn't won a playoff game, so I think your statements are very fair. And I don't think Matt Patricia, he could elevate this defense and get them to a point where they're contending and keeping them in ball games. But I think offensively they could take a step back. This guy's not an offensive-minded guy at all. Yes, he's still obviously got his offensive coordinator there. But Matthew Stafford, like you said, I don't think he's got the weapons. The running game's still pretty weak. The wide receiving core is average at best. And Patricia, he's got guys to work with defensively, but not a lot. They're in a very tough division with Green Bay and Minnesota in that division. And I also think Chicago could take a step up this year. So a lot of teams, there's not going to be an easy game on that schedule for Detroit. I think they're an 8-8, 7-9 team. I cannot see them winning the NFC. So no, for me, even at 14-1, it's a pass.
They traded up to get Kerryon Johnson out of Auburn. And although I think in recent years it's become a legitimate debate as to whether or not the SEC is truly the top conference or in college football, one thing's for sure, the SEC West is the best conference out there, the toughest conference to play in. So he is for real. And then they added LeGarrette Blount as well. So they should have a much better running game. And like I said, from everything I've read, Matt Patricia is definitely 100% committed to building up their running game. The offensive line was alleged to have underachieved last year, in part because of injuries, but it gets back to what I say all along, that if you've got Matt Stafford playing in front of your offensive line's always going to underachieve, just like the offensive lines in front of Jay Cutler always underachieved, and the list goes on. I know every time I mention the name of Matt Stafford, I always wind up comparing him to some of the other guys that I said all along were going to be bust and underachievers, but I'm not so sure the offensive line underachieved as much as they're going to be perennial underachievers. And you know what? Here, Troy, I'm going to make this prediction. This is what the media is going to say about Detroit's offensive line this year. Man, they're great run blockers. They're just not very good pass blockers. So what does Jim Rome say? Rack it. You can rack that up right now. If Detroit is healthy with the running back, they're going to have a good running game. I don't know about a passing game, but at the same time, I think it's a good thing that they're going to depend less on Matt Stafford, and maybe he will be a better quarterback as a result. Right in your hometown, Troy, Seattle, the plus 1950. Again, people who are my clients at offshoreinsiders.com know that I love Russell Wilson, but boy, he's going to be missing some weapons, Richardson and Graham. He just doesn't have the weapons, and we know that, it's debatable whether or not losing Richard Sherman was a good or bad thing, but I do think that Seattle has one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, though, admittedly, let's play devil's advocate. He hasn't been one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL the past couple years. Seattle, I think they are now, going back to mediocrity. I don't like them at plus 1950.
Yeah, no, me neither, Joe. Their offensive line is going to be vastly improved. They had a good running back with Rashad Penny. They got Chris Carson coming back at running back. So the running games could potentially be there, and that's going to help Russell Wilson out a lot. But they lose Jimmy Graham. They lose Michael Bennett. They lose Richard Sherman. They've got Earl Thomas holding out. I mean, boy, they have so many question marks on this lineup. They lose Chris Richard. They've got a new offensive coordinator. They've got a new defensive coordinator. This Seattle team is in a world of hurt. I really, really believe that. I think this could be a 6-10 team. If they're lucky, they get to 7 wins. If they have a great year, they get to 8 wins. But they have a lot of holes offensively. Like you said, Joe, they've really only got Doug Baldwin to throw the football to. Brandon Marshall was added, but come on, really? I don't think that's much of an addition, and they don't even know if he's going to make the team. Ricardo Lockett, another guy that, Tyler Lockett, another guy that, injured last year, coming back, what's he bringing to the table? They've got a lot of holes. They want to get back to running the football, and I think that's going to help Wilson out a lot, take a load off his shoulders. But the defense has got a lot of holes, and that offense, boy, it's going to be tough to see them put up a lot of points this year. So, no, I think Seattle, boy, it would take a miracle for them to make the playoffs, let alone get to the Super Bowl. No chance.
One of the reasons that I say that I don't like to make futures bets is this time last year I thought Tampa Bay was the favorites to go to the Super Bowl. Well, my favorite, I should say, my prediction to go to the Super Bowl, but they are the poster child of why I like to make those week-to-week adjustments and don't like to be married to a long-term bet. Jameis Winston, ay caramba, well, he's going to be suspended. From a pure football standpoint, maybe that's a blessing in disguise. He can come back with the proverbial chip on his shoulder, much like a couple years ago with Tom Brady, in the physical game. Maybe it doesn't really hurt to get a little bit of time off, but, I'm sorry, he's a time bomb waiting to explode. Each one of these incidences, maybe in and of themselves, you could give him the benefit of the doubt, but somebody who's involved in several he said, she said incidences, sorry, and then the whole thing about the crabs or whatever at Publix or the lobster, king crabs, whatever they were. If that's the worst thing he's ever done, you could maybe let it slide, but it's clearly not the worst thing that he's ever done. I just think that Jameis really has to get that head on straight. He can be one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. We know, we saw him in college where he never wilted under pressure, and sometimes he responded to adversity, and certainly showed that in his rookie year. He had the potential to be one of the premier quarterbacks in the NFL, but he's taken some steps backwards. He's got two great weapons in Jackson and Evans, and even Chris Godwin had a very decent rookie year. Could this be the breakout year for O.J. Howard? I do think that Tampa is a potential dark horse team. Essentially, when a team is a disappointment the previous year, I like to bet on them early the next year. So there you go. There's some hints of what some of my picks might be in weeks 1, 2, and 3 at offshoreinsiders.com. But can Jameis Winston, first of all, he's got to come back from his suspension. Can he finally grow up and become one of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL? Because it's running out of excuses. He's got the weapons in Tampa, plus 2150.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to likely start in an 0-3 hole. So when you start in an 0-3 hole, I don't think you have any chance of making the Super Bowl. And, God knows what's going to happen to that locker room after an 0-3 hole. Ryan Fitzpatrick's probably going to have the reins, and they open up against 3 playoff teams. I don't have it in front of me, Joe. I know the Philadelphia Eagles is one of the 3. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers might even be in there. I'd have to go back and check, but I was listening and doing some research, and they do open up against 3 playoff teams, and it's not an easy start to the season for this Tampa Bay team. So 0-3 could be very much in the headlights for this Tampa Bay team. And then Jameis Winston comes back week 4, and who knows what's going to happen at that point. I think at that point, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers could be long gone and a forgotten team. They've got the talent. They've got good home field advantage. They've got weapons to throw to. There's no doubt, like you said, Evans and Jackson and Howard. But that didn't work last year, and I don't think it's going to work this year either. I think Tampa Bay is a lousy football team, and I do not see them making the playoffs this year.
New Orleans, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh are who they
there
do.
You go.
Oh yeah, there you go. That's who they do open up against. So yeah, Ryan Fitzpatrick was one of these guys who was maybe Case Keenum before Case Keenum was Case Keenum, but Fitzpatrick's really getting up there in age, and I don't think he's a very good stopgap measure anymore. I mean, he's another guy who's a pretty good athlete, and was one of these guys that I think was either one of the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL or towards the bottom of starting quarterbacks, but he's just getting up there in age, and boy, oh boy, yeah, if they can come out of there with even one win to hand to Jameis Winston, that might be a pretty good thing. But still, yeah, I do think that Tampa does have that upside and might be a little bit dangerous at plus 2150. The Chicago Bears, the main reason I'm talking about them is a lot of people, it's such a copycat league, and I think that Chicago's clearly trying to match what the Rams did last year, hiring Matt Nagy, and Mitch Trubisky was a guy who showed some flashes. He's clearly a good athlete, but much like Jared Goff was 2 years ago, very disappointing rookie season, but we see from Jared Goff, you don't want to completely give up on a guy just because he was terrible in his rookie year. Can they find the magic? They're going to go with a lot more of a West Coast offense, a lot more of the run-past option. Are the Bears a possibility of being at least a good dark horse team? Maybe not to win the Super Bowl, but at least to make the playoffs. And could they catch some teams off guard early in the year?
Yeah, definitely they're going to be competitive. There's no doubt about that. This team took a big step forward last year. Trubisky played well at times. Home field advantage is obviously good. The run game's good. They don't have a lot of weapons at wide receiver. Defensively, they're okay at best. But, Mitchell Trubisky, I think this guy, he proved me wrong last year. I thought he was going to be a total bust, and he looked okay at times. He really did. He's got a strong arm. Accuracy starting to get a little bit better. I wouldn't be surprised if they sneak up on some teams. This is a good football team. They're well coached. And like I said, they got a good run game, and the offensive line seemed to be holding true. So the division's tough. I mean, you're going up, like you said, against Minnesota, Detroit, and Green Bay. You got to play those teams 6 out of your 16 games. It's going to be tough to do. I could see the Bears being vastly improved. Definitely not a Super Bowl team. Sneaking to the playoffs, maybe, but my money wouldn't be on it.
Well, they're the teams that I thought at least were worth talking about. Troy, are there maybe any other teams that I didn't mention, some of the also-rans last year that you think could sneak up on anybody, or did I pretty much, cover the teams in the NFC worth talking about?
Yeah, I think we kind of covered everybody, Joe. I think that the Arizona Cardinals will be interesting this year, to say the least. I mean, David Johnson coming back at running back could really help that team out. They got a quarterback controversy going on with Bradford and Josh Rosen. If Bradford comes in and truly stays healthy, who knows? They've got a decent receiving core. The defense is okay. I don't think they're a true contender, but maybe a dark horse if everything goes right. Arizona's got talent, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with what they do in that division, because that division's, other than the Rams, that division's got some holes. We know the Seahawks take a step back. San Francisco is still, as we talked about, kind of an interesting wild card. So, but other than that, Joe, I think we covered just about everything.
And I've already gone on record as saying that I think Josh Rosen will be, maybe that's a little bit of a tongue twister, Josh Rosen will be a better quarterback long-term than Sam Darnold. So again, I'll say racket. I think Sam Darnold's going to be a bust. I do think Josh Rosen, I like him as a quarterback. I like guys that get the ball out to the receivers very quickly. And Rosen does have that quick release. So yeah, maybe, they could be a team that could sneak up on some people in Arizona. I am a big Josh Rosen fan, but I don't think there's going to be any, mega long shot that's going to come from the NFC. Well, folks, make sure you do subscribe to the SBR videos so you can get future previews from both Troy and me. And Troy, why don't you tell everybody what they can get at TroyWins.com?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Off to a great start in the World Cup, 8-4 so far. We've won 4 in a row after starting off 4-4. We're now 8-4 in the World Cup. Getting really excited to get through these group stages and onto the real deal. So come take a look at what we're doing. Still staying strong in the MLB. And boy, we're really looking forward to college football and the NFL. Looking forward to doing many more previews with you. It's TroyWins.com. We're happy to give you a free trial and show you what we're all about. So come take a look.
And I've been able to tighten up some systems in Major League Baseball at OffshoreInsiders.com. So having a much better year than last year, really relying on a couple fantastic regression of the mean systems. And yes, I've added even more college football and NFL systems. And as I do file this report, the summer is still young, probably going to get a whole lot more. So we keep getting better and better every single football season. Now over 30 years in the business. June 1st, 1988, past that 30-year mark at OffshoreInsiders.com. Like I said, Troy and I, we're going to do a lot more previews for Sportsbook Review, so make sure you stay tuned and subscribe so you will not miss the Vegas Offshore Wise Guy show here on Sportsbook Review.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to our channel. Now, we've put a lot of work into producing all these free videos, so please help us out and keep all our content free for you forever by simply liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Now, not to mention, a visit to our industry-leading website will warm the hearts of all our SBR employees, especially myself. Now, the links are over there to the left, so do check those out. Thanks for watching.